We are just one day away from what may be the most consequential presidential election in modern history. Cody, thanks for joining me this morning. You've put together an incredible panel. How are you feeling there in Colorado?
Oh, we're doing good. Been traveling a lot and working on medical issues. And Ole is over there. I think he's in Germany now, but he may be going to Indonesia. I haven't heard yet. So I'm glad that we could have Dr. Ford and Barbara Honegger here. This is a real pleasure to have such high-level guests here. So this is going to be great, and I've been looking forward to it all week.
And me as well. I want to thank you for putting this panel together. I did get a chance to speak to Ole, and that's one of the things I wanted to address before we get to our main topic. Ole and his family are literally fleeing Spain to avoid these lockdowns that are now coming to Europe. And I had an opportunity to speak with him briefly yesterday. Light on Conspiracies here on Crowdsource. The Truth is going to temporarily be on hiatus until Ole can get to a safe location. And so I really want to thank our guests who are joining us today. We're joined, as you said, by Barbara Honegger and Dr. Gregory Ford. Welcome to the show, everybody.
Hi, Jason.
Glad to be here. Pleasure.
Pleasure to have you both back. And people will remember that, Barbara, you have been on the show before in your role with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. We've done a show with you in the past, and you have spoken to our audience about your book, October Surprise. And when people hear about these October surprises, you've literally written the book. Can you give us just a brief overview of your background, Barbara? You're an incredibly accomplished professional. You're an author. You worked in the White House. For people perhaps who haven't heard of you before, can you give us a quick introduction?
Okay. I love these self-introductions. I don't see myself on the screen. Maybe I should. I don't know.
Well, we can
but anyway, my background. Well, I've held a number of high-level positions in the federal government, the United States federal government, including White House policy analyst in the first Reagan administration, including special assistant to the president for domestic policy, including leading, being the director of the U.S. Attorney General's Law Review at the Department of Justice. And for 16 years, I was the senior military affairs journalist at the Naval Postgraduate School here in the Monterey Peninsula of California, where I live. And the Naval Postgraduate School is billed by the Department of Defense itself as DoD's premier science, technology, and national security affairs graduate research university for the entire nation. So I was the top journalist there for 16 years. And for about 5 years now, time flies, could be longer, I've been on the board, an officer, and a member of the research and petition drafting committee for the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And we have been on your show before for that. So I'm also, most importantly for this program, I am the author of the book, meaning the pioneering first book by almost 3 years, called title October Surprise. October Surprise was published on May 12th of 1989. It is a book which has now been confirmed. Its thesis, I'll tell you that in just a moment in a nutshell. Its thesis has now been validated and confirmed by formerly classified documents and deathbed confessions by some of the major conspirators of the October Surprise. And in a nutshell, what is the October Surprise? Why is it relevant today? The October Surprise was the Reagan-Bush Sr. campaign's treasonous, behind the scenes, under the table, secret negotiations with the Iranian Khomeini regime to delay the release of our 52 hostages, which were then held during the final days of President Carter's second term in office, or maybe it was his first term in office. He only had one term, thanks to Ronald Reagan's October Surprise. So the Reagan-Bush Sr. campaign worked with the Khomeini regime in a secret agreement, a meeting in Paris, France, on the night and into the wee hours of the morning of October 18th and 19th, 1980. And they negotiated an agreement to delay the release of the hostages, which would guarantee Carter's defeat because he was then trying to bring them home legitimately because he was president. And in exchange, once they gained the White House, which they did, Reagan and Bush Sr. and William Casey, who became Reagan's first CIA director, as many people recall, Bill Casey, they agreed to secretly send a minimum of $5 billion of secret arms to Iran through the Israelis as the middleman. And that is the October surprise. It is a treasonous deal by which the Republicans gained the White House in 1980. And if that had not happened, we wouldn't have Donald Trump today.
And to be clear, Barbara, a lot of people have heard this term October surprise. You coined the phrase when you wrote this book.
No, that's not correct.
Oh,
October
okay.
surprise was actually my understanding. I'm not a sports enthusiast or aficionado, but October surprise, I understand, is kind of like a Hail Mary. At the end of a game, October surprise or Hail Mary is something that one team does to surprise the other, and not always on the up and up. So I use that term because actually George Bush Sr., who was then Reagan's running mate, vice presidential running mate in October 1980, used the term himself in that period of the campaign in October 1980.
I see. So, but that's a very interesting detail for everybody to understand. And what you've just described to us really is just scratching the surface of the Iran-Contra scandal, which this was only part of. The intermediary, if I'm correct, with the arms deal was a guy named Mark Rich, who would later be pardoned by Bill Clinton and is now considered one of the most controversial presidential pardons in history. Of course, our current Attorney General, William Barr, was the Attorney General at the time that all these pardons were going on, Caspar Weinberger and all that, under George H.W. Bush. So there's a long legacy of corruption, cover-ups, and it goes right to tomorrow's presidential election, doesn't it?
Right. Well, Mark Rich was just one of the lower-level intermediaries, as I understand it. But Monitor Garbanafar and the Israelis, working with Robert McFarland, who was the national security advisor, and George Bush Sr., then vice president. Those are the people who were the real intermediaries for the October surprise. And Bill Barr, most importantly, let me give you the bottom line. The October surprise treasonous deal by Reagan and Bush Sr. in October of 1980 during the campaign, the final days of the campaign in 1980 against Carter, is the real deep story behind the Iran side of Iran-Contra. Everything you think you know about Iran-Contra is just a minor part of what's really going on with the October surprise and Iran-Contra.
Wow. And people who are familiar with you know that you worked in the White House very closely with President Reagan and Vice President Bush. So this is not
Vice President Bush, with Reagan.
Oh, okay. But in the picture, I saw you there with Vice President Bush, and he, if a picture tells 1,000 words, he doesn't look exactly enthusiastic in terms of how he's gazing at you there. What would you say George H.W. Bush's impression of you was?
Well, the Reagan and the Bush sides of the Reagan-Bush White House, Bush Sr. White House, were worlds apart. Especially after the assassination attempt, and maybe we can get into that because there is some pretty serious circumstantial evidence linking Bush Sr. to the Reagan assassination attempt. So the October surprise, because Bush Sr. was the key individual at the October surprise meeting that did the treasonous deal with the Khomeini regime to defeat Carter and put them in the White House. That was the beginning of the 1-2 punch to try to get Bush Sr. into the presidency. First was the October surprise, which he did the deal. And then in the very short period of time on March 30th of 1981, shortly after Reagan gained the White House with Bush as his vice president, there was the Reagan assassination attempt, which many people forget. But I had personal experience inside the White House that night I could share with you about Bush's, I believe Bush's involvement in that.
Wow. And we're going to have an opportunity to talk about all of that. I think a lot of people are very aware there's been a tremendous amount of censorship going on. Twitter doesn't even want people to talk about factual evidence presented by the New York Post. And that is part of the reason why we've created the sponsor exclusive segments where people can join us for the full conversation on subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. That's going to be beginning in less than 20 minutes. We also have with us today the author of Midnight in Samara, Dr. Gregory Ford. Dr. Ford, thank you for joining us again. It's going to be very important for us to hear from you as well, because you, as you told us in the last show, have extensive experience in Iraq, including direct contact with Beau Biden. Isn't that correct?
Yes, as a matter of fact. Now, Iraq, of course, as in my book, I present the whole situation as something very interesting. Okay, yes, I met Mr. Beau Biden, but remember at the time, Beau Biden was just another soldier. All right, and there wasn't a celebrity aura about him. There wasn't any. His father's a senator or a vice president or anything like that. But he, big happenings have small beginnings. And one morning, okay, this was the morning of the evening before that we had come into Iraq, and we had actually arrived at Balad Air Base, which was still burning. The Iraqis were lighting fires all over, burning documents, burning anything that was sensitive. And so we had to wait that morning till the next morning to go in safely. And so we sat there with our tanks waiting to go into the front gate. And so we went in that morning, and surprise, all right, I have my surprises too, okay? And so we went in, and the situation was such is that there were even really indicting issues like Russian rubber chemical suits, okay, that were stacked about 8 feet high, and of course immediately they were. I realized that they were coated with a heavy oil, okay, and this is implying yes, there were WMD there, all right. So we actually sampled some of the oil and sent it out to NBC. That's nuclear, biological, and chemical analysis. And so what happened then was, it was kind of an epiphany. The command sent the message out that yes, it was there. This material was there, evidence was there, and what do we do with it? Okay, was the response. And strange thing, the response came back, get rid of all reference to WMD, weapons of mass destruction, all right?
Despite the fact that was the purpose of the mission, ostensibly, to locate weapons of mass destruction.
That's absolutely correct. So what happened then was, is they of course, the command came to me and said, Doc, okay, the doctor, they said, get rid of this stuff, okay? We're having, and all of these things lead to something else, okay? And so they said that the engineers were digging a massive pit. They were digging several massive pits, okay? And there's about 300,000 involved soldiers right now that have been involved and exposed to these burn pits, okay? These are the infamous burn pits. You think Agent Orange was famous? These burn pits are going to be much worse, okay, and the implications. So I took the rubber chemical suits put him in a pit, and and I said, look, okay, you do understand this is sarin gas. This is sarin oil. Okay, this is how it's transported. And they said, the command looks at me and they said, Doc, we don't care what it is. Get rid of it right now. This is the command from the Pentagon. This is the command from upstairs. Get rid of all evidence of weapons of mass destruction. So I doused the whole pile in the pit. There was a massive pit dug, and I put diesel and gasoline, and they handed me a flare, and so I went to strike the flare, and I cleared everyone away from the pit, and I said, look, okay, everybody's probably going to get a dose of something lethal and toxic, all right? And I turned around with a lit flare, and all the command was running as far as they could to get away from me, okay? And so I tossed the flare in, and of course it started the Russian chemical suits, the rubber suits burning, and you can imagine what an inferno it was. And the thing was, at that point, then I turned around and ran myself, okay? Because sarin was in the air we were breathing, okay? The entire base was being exposed to sarin, all right? So, to make a long story short, hopefully, okay, then I said, okay, we have something. We have weapons of mass destruction here. What do we do with it? Okay, and they said, oh, we're calling in experts. Okay, some more contractors, the infamous contractors, to handle it. And then so that the next day,
wasn't it Halliburton, Dr. Ford, that was the experts that were supposed to handle the destruction of this material?
Yes, yeah. Dick Cheney's very own. Okay, yes. Dick Cheney appears all through the whole episode of Iraq. Okay, and so then the next day, I was on the Tigris River. All right, speaking to a water treatment plant Iraqi manager, and it goes something like this: is a colonel that was living there, an Iraqi colonel, walked down the hill to where I was, looking at the plant next to the Tigris, and he said this, and this is historical and empirical and related to our whole episode. He said, I suppose you Americans, okay, he spoke perfect English. He did sound like a little bit like an Italian spaghetti Western cowboy, okay? But the thing was, he said, I suppose you Americans will get your hands on all the weapons of mass destruction and leave. You got to leave. And I said, well, that's the plan. And he said, fine. He said, tomorrow I will meet you. I will come over to the base. Okay. He called it Al Qaeda. That especially got my attention. Huh. He will come over to the base, Al Qaeda. And he took me. Okay. He came over, got me. And of course, I said, that evening I was thinking, well, this is one of the stupider things I've done, is to have an Iraqi colonel come take me to a hidden depot of weapons of mass destruction. I'll probably, I'm lucky I didn't end up on your show having my head cut off. Okay. Wow. So one of those things. Okay. Yeah. So I, and this is all in the book, by the way. And so the thing is I went with this colonel, and it turned out this colonel was the colonel of the fighter bomber wing that dropped all the weapons of mass destruction on the Kurds, okay, in Kurdistan, and he that resulted in approximately 800,000, maybe 1 million dead in Kurdistan, and then he was also responsible for turning right around and dropping weapons of mass destruction on the Iranians, all right, in the Shuttle Rob waterway. and Carg Island. All right. Yes.
Wow.
So our weapons were being used to kill, all right, kill on a massive scale, Iranians and Kurds, Kurdistan. Those are the Kurds that our president, hopefully not for too long, our president ordered. Let me see, what did he do in Syria? he told the Kurds, we're going to betray you and leave you defenseless against the Turks. This is our president. Okay, so.
Well, before we go too far down that road, I don't mean to cut you off, Dr. Ford, but we are close to the end of this segment, and we'll have a lot of time to carry on discussing that and other matters when we continue on Patreon and Subscribestar. I just wanted to bring this all together for everybody in the last few minutes, because what you're talking about is tied directly to what Barbara told us about as far as how the weapons of mass destruction got there, how this whole relationship between the United States, Iran, Iraq, all got underway. And all of that ties into what Cody has told us about the bombing in Oklahoma City. Isn't that right, Cody?
Right, yeah, that bombing was to cover up a bunch of records about Bill Clinton and the Rose Law Firm and all that cocaine and the back end of it, the money laundering and the weapons and so forth. But through Centaur Rose, the operation going into Nicaragua. But the main thing about the records was the cover up of the Gulf War syndrome, with the squalene laced adjuncts in the vaccines. Right. And also there were some records in there about some of the arms dealing that have been going on, specifically related to biochem weapons, biological weapons, anthrax, all that kind of stuff. So yes, it does all tie in, and there's been multiple layers of cover up, and it's also used politically, like Barbara was talking about. January 20th of 1981 is when Reagan got inaugurated, and at that point it was 444 days that our people in Tehran had been under captivity. I had a friend that was with the ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence, there right before our embassy was hit, and they took out about 66 of our embassy people, and then released a few of them, and then kept about 52 of them. So, I had another friend that also was Defense Intelligence Agency planner, Captain Glenn Wilson. He was in Operation Eagle Claw to set up the rescue there, and how all this was used politically for the, defeat Carter in the election, make him look bad and so forth. So this is a really interesting thing, and it ties to Oklahoma City. It ties through 9/11. It ties in a lot of things, political, economic, and especially weapons and vaccines.
Yeah.
May I add something about Oklahoma City?
Please.
Yeah. By the way, Jason, when Greg speaks, he was on the full screen, but when I speak, I don't see myself on the full screen. I don't know.
I'm not sure why that is, but we're seeing you right now.
Okay. Well, lovely. I don't see myself, but it doesn't matter. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that. Yeah, I do want to, before we go to Patreon, for the rest of the show in more detail, I do want to just put on the record, and it's great being on with you, Cody. You probably already know this, but there is a direct link through my research between Oklahoma City and 9/11. And in a nutshell, the bottom line is that Oklahoma City, of course, there were pre-placed bombs, explosives inside the building. And of course, one of your claims to fame, whether you like it or not, right? Who would want that claim to fame? But you have it. If I understand correctly, is that you were offered a pretty good sum of money to pre-place those explosives inside the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. And when you declined that, your life was under threat. You had to go into safe houses. Well, what's the link to 9/11? The link to 9/11 is that the same structural engineer from the Army Civil Engineers, from the Army Corps of Civil Engineers, headed up the cover-up of the so-called investigation of the what happened or allegedly happened at Oklahoma City. The
Wow.
self-same individual from the Army Corps of Engineers headed up the ASCE so-called investigation of the Pentagon attack. And the attack on Oklahoma City, which was covered up, the pre-placed explosives inside on the columns, some of which went off, some of which didn't. The explosion or the attack on Oklahoma City, the official story of it, that it was just the Ryder truck bomb on the outside of Timothy McVeigh, that official story of what allegedly happened at Oklahoma City was used as the explicit pretext for the hardening of the outer wall of the west wedge of the White House, of the west side of the White House, actually wedge one, part of the west wedge of the not the White House, of the Pentagon, that was allegedly hit by a plane on 9/11. And they brought in the same head of the investigation at the Pentagon of the Army Corps of Engineers to head that up. So the cover-up artist for that covered up the truth of the inside explosives and bombs at Oklahoma City also came in and covered up the truth of the pre-placed explosives at the Pentagon.
Wow.
And the evidence for pre-placed explosives at the Pentagon is the subject of my YouTube, which has hundreds of thousands of views. Just go to YouTube and plug in Behind the Smoke Curtain, Barbara Honegger, and you will see all of that evidence.
Amazing. People are going to be able to check that out. Behind the Smoke Curtain, here it is. People can find it on YouTube, and that's going to be very informative. You know, Barbara, you've done so much incredible work, and I'm glad you were able to give us the comprehensive introduction, because your accomplishments are so vast, it's difficult for me to remember them all, even having read your bio. But in just a few minutes, in just a few minutes, yes.
No, I just wanted to say that's wonderful information. But what you see in all these operations over and over again is a person like this who is an engineer, and he covered up Oklahoma City bombing, helped cover up another one. They use people like this, Dr. Jolyon West, the CIA psychologist that was involved in the MK Ultra program. You know, he interviewed Sirhan after Kennedy's assassinated. Then he shows up. They sent a 6-man team into Oklahoma City just after April 19th, 95, and he headed up a CIA team to assess the psychological impact, see? And so these are psyops. And they anytime anything happens, it's the same guys, whether they're psychologists, engineers, pilots, whoever. And I would suggest that many of these people are probably undercover CIA assets or personnel, and their position is being an engineer or a staff psychologist or whatever. And then they show up over and over again at these false flag events, and their job is to use their credentials to hide behind while they're participating in a cover-up. And that way, pertinent information, pertinent facts are either lost or whatever happens. And it's a standard program. It goes through engineering, psychology, weapons, WMD, pharmacology, over and over and over. And they have a well-placed agent in a high position of power. Nobody knows if they're agents. And that's how Black Ops works. And then they're able to steer the investigation, you know, whether it be the Warren Commission with Alan Dulles or the 9/11 Commission or any of that. So this is super, and I'm really happy to be here.
Me too.
And thank you so much, Cody, for putting together this panel. People are going to be able to join us for the discussion in just 1 minute on subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. We'll see everybody there. Thanks for watching.